Island of the Blue Dolphins, Chapter 19. Another summer had come, and still I had not speared the giant devilfish that lived near the cave. She still wants that octopus. Every day during the spring, Rontu and I went to look for him. I would put the canoe in the water and paddle slowly through the cave from one opening to the other, often several times. I saw many devilfish there, where the black water is streaked with light, but not the giant one. I think I would have started with the little one, Karana. I wouldn't have gone for the hugest one. At last I gave up looking for him and began to gather abalones for winter. The red shells hold the sweetest meat and are best for drying, though the green ones and the black ones are also good. Because the red ones are the sweetest, starfish prey upon them. This star-shaped creature places itself over the shell of an abalone, with its 5 arms spread out against the rock to which the abalone is fastened. It holds the shell with its suckers and then begins to lift itself. The starfish pulls against the abalone shell, sometimes for days. Boy, that's a committed animal, isn't it? Sometimes for days. My goodness, holding on with its suckers and pushing up with its legs until little by little, the heavy shell comes loose from the body. One morning we left the cave and paddled out to the reef, which is joined to it. For many days I had been gathering a few shellfish on the rocks of Coral Cove, but I had not been watching the reef. But I had been watching the reef and waiting for the right time to harvest. So she has to be very careful about harvest, whether it be something out of the ground or something from the ocean. She's learning what is best to harvest and when to harvest it. And that's a smart gal, I'll tell you. Oh my. This is when there are few starfish feeding, for they are very hard. They're so hard. They're as hard to pry loose from the abalone as an abalone is to pry from a rock. The tide was low, and the reef rose far out of the water. Along its sides were great numbers of red abalones and very few starfish. So, before the sun was high, I filled the bottom of the canoe. Good. The day was windless, and since I had all I could carry, I tied the canoe and, with Rontu following me, climbed onto the reef to look for fish to spear for our supper. Because she's got to dry the abalone. She can readily cook a fish, so she needs something for that night. Blue dolphins were leaping beyond the kelp beds. In the kelp, otter were playing at the games that they never tire of. And around me everywhere, the gulls were fishing for scallops, which were numerous that summer. And scallops are really good too. She should maybe try to get a few scallops too. They're very delicious. The scallops, they grow on the floating kelp leaves. I didn't know that. And there were so many of them that much of the kelp near the reef had been dragged to the bottom because they're heavy. Still, there were scallops that the gulls could reach and take them in with their beaks. So everyone's fishing today. All right. The gulls would then swoop down on the rocks. They'd drop them and then pick up their meat from the broken shells. Scallops fell on the reef like rain, which amused me, but not Rontu, who could not understand what the gulls were doing. Dodging this way and that, I went to the end of the reef where the biggest fish live. With a sinew line and a hook made of abalone shell, and by the way, that's one of the things I saw, one of the fish hooks she had made of abalone in the museum in Santa Barbara. It's beautiful. So with the sinew line and her hook made of abalone, she caught two that had large heads, two large fish with large heads and long teeth, but they're good to eat. Ooh. I gave one to Rontu, and on the way back to the canoe gathered purple sea urchins to use for dyeing. I wonder what she's going to dye with the sea urchins. Rontu, who was trotting along in front of me, suddenly dropped his fish and stood, looking down over the edge of the reef. There, swimming in the clear water, was a devilfish. It was the same one I had been hunting for. It was the giant. Oh, no. Here we go again. Seldom did you see any devilfish here, for they like deep places, and the water along this part of the reef is hollow or shallow. I need my glasses. It's very shallow. It's not very deep here. Perhaps this one lived in the cave and came here only when he could not find food. Rontu made no sound. I fixed the head of the spear and the long string that held it to my wrist. I then crawled back to the edge of the reef. The giant had not moved. He was floating just below the surface of the water, and I could plainly see his eyes. They were the size of small stones and stood out from his head with black rims and gold centers in the centers of the black spot, like the eyes of a spirit. I had once seen on a night where the rain had fallen and lightning forked in the sky. So she thinks she saw a spirit, but I don't believe she did. I think that she thought that some of the, what she had seen during the storm in the sky was a spirit. But it reminded her of that night. The giant was half the length of my spear from the reef, but while I watched, one of his long arms ran out like a snake and felt its way into the crevice. It went past the fish and along the side of the rock, and then the end of it curled back. As the arm gently wound itself around the fish from behind, I rose to one knee and drove the spear. I aimed at the giant's head, but though it was larger than my two fishes and a good target, I missed. The spear struck down through the water and slanted off. Instantly, a black cloud surrounded the devilfish. The only thing I could see of him was one long arm still grasping his prey. I jumped to my feet to pull in the spear, thinking that I might have a chance to throw it again. As I did so, the shaft bobbed back to the surface, and I saw that the barbed point had come loose. At the same moment, the string tightened. My grip on it broke, and aware that I had struck the devilfish, I quickly dropped the coils I held. Uh-oh. And when the string runs out fast, it burns your hands or becomes entangled. So the string is, the devilfish is pulling, and the string is actually being pulled by it. And if you're holding on to that and it goes through your hands, it's like a rope burn. It's terrible. The devilfish does not swim with fins or flippers like other things in the sea. He takes water in through the hole in front of his body and pushes the water out behind through two slits. When he is swimming slowly, you can see these two streams trailing out, but only then. When he moves fast, you can see nothing except a streak in the water. The coils I had dropped on the rock hopped and sang as they ran. Then there were no more of them. The string tightened on my wrist, and to lessen the shock, I leapt across the crevice in the direction the giant had taken. With the string in both hands, but still fastened to my wrist, I braced my feet on the slippery rock and leaned backwards. The string snapped tight with the weight of the devilfish. It began to stretch, and fearing that it might break, I walked forward. Yet I made him pull me every step. She's putting herself in danger, isn't she? I'm telling you, she should have gotten a smaller one. He was moving toward the cave along the edge of the reef. The cave was a good distance away. If he got there, I would surely lose him. The canoe was tied just in front of me. Once I was in it, I could let him pull me until he grew tired, but there was no way to untie the canoe and still hold on to my string. Ooh, she's in a dilemma, isn't she, boys and girls? Rontu all this time was running up and down the reef, barking and leaping at me, which made my task harder. I think he was probably worried about her and wanted her to just let go. Cut the string, maybe. He cares about her and he wants to, protect her. Step by step, I walked forward until the devilfish was in the deep water. He was so close that I had to stop even if the sinew broke and I lost him. I therefore braced myself and did not move. The sinew stretched, throwing off drops of water. I could hear it stretch. I was sure it would break. I did not feel it cutting into my hands, though they bled. The pull suddenly lessened and I was sure that he was gone, but the next instant I saw the string cutting the water in a wide circle. He was swimming off from the cave and the reef toward some rocks that were about twice the length of the string away. He would be safe there too, for among them were many places to hide. I pulled in half the string while he was moving towards the rocks, but soon had to let it back out. It grew tight and again began to stretch. The water here was only a little over my waist. I let myself down over the reef. There was a sandbar not far from the rocks, and stepping carefully on the bottom, which was full of holes, I slowly made my way toward it. Rontu swam along on my side. I don't know if they should be in the water because the devilfish can, or the octopus, can attack them in the water. And we know about their strong arms. Ugh, this is getting kind of scary, isn't it? I reached the sandbar before the devilfish could hide himself in the rocks. The string held, and he turned about and once more swam toward the cave. Twice again he did this. Each time I took in some of the string. The third time, as he came up into the shallow water, I walked backward across the sandbar so he would not see me and pulled on the string with all my strength. The giant slid up on the sand. He lay with his arms spread out partly in the water, and I thought he was dead. Then I saw his eyes moving. Before I could shout a warning, Rontu had rushed forward and seized him. But the devilfish was too heavy to lift or shake. As Rontu's jaws sought another hold, 3 of the many arms wound themselves around his neck. Devilfish are only dangerous when in the water, where they can fasten themselves to you and with their long arms. These arms have rows of suckers underneath them, and they can drag you under and hold you there until you drown. But even on land, the devilfish can injure you, for he is strong and does not die quickly. The giant was flailing his arms, struggling to get back into the water. Little by little, he was dragging Rontu with him. I could no longer use the string because it was wound around Rontu's legs. The whalebone knife I used for prying abalones from the rocks was tied to a thong on my wrist. The blade was thick at the point, but with a sharp edge. I dropped the coils of string and unfastened the knife as I ran. I ran past the devilfish and got between him and the deep water. So many of his arms were flailing that it was useless to cut any one of them. One struck me on the leg and burned like a whip. Another, which Rontu had chewed off, lay wriggling at the edge of the water, as if it were looking for something to fasten onto. The head rose out of the twisting arms like a giant stalk. The gold eyes with their black rims were fixed on me. Above the sounds of the waves and the water splashing and Rontu's barking, I could hear the snapping of the beak, which was sharper than the knife I held in my hands. I drove the knife down into his body, and as I did, this, I was suddenly covered, or so it seemed, with a countless number of leeches sucking at my skin. Fortunately, one hand was free, the hand that held the knife, and again I struck down through the tough hide. The suckers, which were fastened to me and pained greatly, lessened their hold. Slowly the arms stopped moving, and they grew limp. Oh my, what a war she is waging. I tried to drag the devilfish out of the water, but my strength was gone. I did not even go back to the reef for my canoe, though I did take the shaft and the head of my spear, which had cost me much labor, and the sinew line. It was night before Rontu and I got back to the home. Rontu had a gash on his nose from the giant's beak. I had many cuts and bruises. I saw 2 more devilfish along the reef that summer, but I did not try to spear them. I can see why. And that is chapter 19 of Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell.